Hello, I got a question here from Michael in Brazil, and he is asking about a warning that came out of Webpack when he was trying to add some things to his Ember app using Ember Auto Import. So Ember Auto Import is built on top of Webpack. Um, we use it to get all your dependencies into your application as easy as possible. And he got this warning out of Webpack saying the following assets exceed the recommended size limit. This can impact web performance. This entry point is bigger than it should be. You can limit the size of your bundles by using import. And when it's written like this with parentheses, that's really the way people talk about dynamic import. So that is actually a good option for one of the things he's using in his app here. If we look at the breakdown, most of the size here that's contributing to the size of the entry point comes from one library, HighCharts.js, right? 199 kibibytes, and that's a good candidate for lazy loading, particularly because it's the kind of thing you're probably only going to use in certain components or certain routes in your application. You don't need to load it up front, so you don't have to. And so today I'll show you how to lazy load that into your Ember application. So let's build a demo, and let's actually use HighCharts. So we're going to make a new application. We'll call it Chart Demo. And first I'm going to skip the npm step because I'm going to do a single npm install so we don't have to sit and watch it during this video. All right, so we're going to add some extra stuff. Yarn add dev, and we want HighCharts. We want Ember Auto Import because that's how we're going to get HighCharts into and some other things into our application. And I'm also going to add a couple other things right now, skipping ahead so that we don't have to run more installs while you're watching. Let me grab exactly what I'm going to need, and we'll talk about each one as we need it. This should be sufficient though, these 4 packages. So let's let that run. This is going to get everything we need for our whole application. While that goes, let's look quickly at what HighCharts is, because we're about to use it. It is, as you might think, for making charts. It is Creative Commons licensed for non-commercial use, and for commercial projects you have to buy a license. But it's got some nice charts and things like that, and people like it. People definitely use it with Ember. There is actually a HighCharts Ember add-on. NPM is saturating my bandwidth here. Let's see if we could get it to load. The Ember HighCharts. Highly rated add-on, pretty popular. This add-on is actually pretty great because it doesn't just give you the library, right? It actually also gives you some components and things like that. So I'm going to show this demo using HighCharts by hand. Don't take that as a endorsement for this library. This library is good. It gives you extra components and things that we're going to build. We're going to build a simple chart component by hand to show how to do these things. But you should also totally feel free to use Ember HighCharts. So how do we get started? Let's see. Getting started. We're going to talk about installation because we already just kind of ran our yarn install. Let's just look at what a chart looks like. Here's their example, and they have a container to put the chart in, and they call this. And so that's like enough code to make a basic chart. So that's what we're going to start with. In our case, because we want to make this something we can stick in an Ember app, we want to, this is using jQuery to wait till the page loads, and then it's going to find this element by ID and render into it. We're going to do this in a more componentized way. Okay, our app is, all our dependencies are installed. We can start up our Ember server. It'll run the first build. That's a good time to also talk about what are we going to chart here. We'll make this apples and bananas chart, but I would like to actually do some real data loading. I think we should make a real chart, get something a little beefier than just this. So I was looking around, and I live in Somerville, Massachusetts, and the city of Somerville turns out has a pretty good data portal with a lot of data sets in it, and I was looking for some interesting data, and I found a data set I care about, which is the bike and pedestrian counts. So once a year, volunteers go out and count bikes, and there's a fairly good methodology where you're doing hour-long samples at a bunch of places in the city. And so we've got, like 6 or 7 years worth of data here. Seems pretty good. And there's even an API endpoint for the data, which is cool. We can get the data as JSON. Let's grab the URL here. Let's grab Postman, see what the data looks like. When we fetch it, we get a list of points. That's all there is to it. We have some details about when it was from and everything. We've got a year and a number of bikes, and that's really all we're going to worry about in this case. I just want to aggregate every year up and see how many bikes we saw in that year. And the only other thing we need to know about this API is you do need, this isn't going to give us the whole data set unless we up the default row limit. So I'm going to ask for 3,000 rows. That's enough to get the whole data set. You can find that in the docs on that actual data set here. It goes all into detail. So anyway, this is my URL. That's what I'm going to add to my Ember app. So my app is running now. I should be able to see it. And yep, there we go. We have an Ember app. So the next thing I want to do, I'm going to make a new route to put my chart on. And of course, I could just keep it on the home page. But remember, the point of this is to show lazy loading of code. And so I would like to show that we only load the code when we go to a certain route and not if we come in at a different route. So I'm going to make a dedicated route to put our chart on. Let's say Ember generate route bikes. And so now we should have a route file for loading the data for that route. Let's see. Okay, so let's load our data. And so I'm going to make a model hook, and I'm just going to use fetch, and I'm going to grab that URL for my data that I wanted as a string. And that's really all I should. Oh, well, fetch returns a promise for the response, which then you need to get as JSON. Because this is also a promise. We want to let that all resolve in our model hook. So we'll just get, our model will be the list of data points. And let's see what that looks like. Here's our template. Let's say each model, our model is the list of data points itself. So if I say each model as point, I should be able to make an entry for each one. We could say, let's look at what is in these. They have point bike. Okay, so now we should be able to go to the bikes route. And oh, we still see the Tomster. Our points are down here. The reason is we never got rid of him, and he's on the application template, meaning it always will show up at the top of every page, right? The outlet here changes as we move from route to route. This is like the Chrome that's always there, and he's on it. So I'm going to take him off of there. I'm actually going to just move him down to the index route, right, which is what renders in the outlet when we're at the home page. The reason I'm just put him there is so I have some content from my home page, so we can compare our home page and our bikes page here separately. So we've got both now, and that's our list of data points. Great. So the next thing I want to do is let's make a component for our chart. So Ember generate component bike chart. And we want to put that component on our actual route here. Right. So far we were just running a list of points. Let's instead render our bike chart, and we'll say data points equals model. We'll pass those into the chart. And why would I make a component here? Partly because I'm looking ahead already at high charts, right? I know I need an element. Components have access to elements. That's the logical place to manipulate DOM. And also just partly because having a portable, reusable, self-contained component for a chart seems like a good thing to have. Right, so let's go find our new component, bike chart, JS. Here's the component we just generated. It should have data points. Before we even worry about the data points, let's just do the high charts thing. So you'll recall at the beginning we already did an yarn install of it, we have the package added to our app. So now all I have to, now let's just start by statically importing it. We're not going to do the lazy loading thing yet. I could just say import high charts from high charts, and I should have it. And the place, when you want to manipulate elements in Ember, the place to do it is in your did inset element hook, right? This is what Ember is going to call as soon as the element for this component is inserted into the DOM. This is going to run, and this is a great place to call high charts. So let's grab that example from their website, like this. And I didn't capitalize mine, seems fine. Fix my indentation. And also, we're not going to do it on this container thing. We're going to do it on this dot element. Okay. So there is the default fruit consumption chart. Seems good. Now, let's tie this up to some of our real data, though. So we have data points, right? And we can do something like, our data points are not really in the right format yet, and I'd like to show like a little bit of the intermediate steps of how to get them that way. So just for ease of consumption, let's just do some temporary stuff for debugging. I'm going to say this debug output equals JSON stringify this data points. And I could pass the optional third argument to JSON stringify, which gives us nice indentation and stuff. And on our template, which we haven't really even needed yet, I'm just going to say, I'm going to pre-format that debug output, which will preserve the white space. And this will make it easy for us to inspect our JSON. We don't want the high charts part yet. Let's temporarily get rid of that. Let's just see our data. This dot debug output. Nope. Was I being too hacky? I guess so. I guess setting in did insert element is wrong. I could make a computed property, but the thing is I'm trying not to bother because I'm not going to need it. It's only for the debug purposes. I guess I'll do one anyway. This is fine. Alright, I'll do the real thing. I will make a computed property. What am I doing wrong anyway? This data point. I believe I did call them this data points. Oh, anyway. Debug output computed. This would be the more typical way to do it anyway. I was trying to cut corners because I just only wanted to just temporarily show our data while we're learning to manipulate it. Debug output HPS. Oh, I was just spelling it wrong all along. Wah, wah. I could have done any of those other hacks too. They would have worked fine. Okay. So anyway, here's our data. It's a list of points, but it's not the right list of points that we want, and it's also not in the format that high charts can deal with. We really just want 1 point per year, and with the total number of bikes for that year. So we really want to do some grouping. So let's come over to our component again, and I would like to clean a couple of things up here first. Let's leave this here, but let's actually just disable this. And so it's just not going to run. I just gave it the wrong name. Now I don't have any errors in my editor, and it's nice to keep things with no red lines. That way the real red lines you'll watch for. So let's make the data we want. So like our bike series is going to be, I want to take the data points and I want to group them. Actually, this is where I would like to use another library. At the beginning I added load-es because I knew I wanted to do this. And the Lodash library is very popular, and if everybody writing JavaScript uses it. It's got a lot of handy utilities. Lodash-ES is packaged as ECMA modules. So instead of bundling everything together into single files that are ready to go to the browser, it ships as the original ES modules, which we can consume very nicely. And the benefit of that is that we can actually then target exactly the ones we want, and it'll pull in this module and the modules that it depends on, but nothing more, so you only get as much as you need, which is really nice. So anyway, we can just use that, and I would like to group my data points by year. So for every point, I'm going to get its year, and that's what we're going to group by. And let's show that instead of what we were showing before. Okay, so we've changed our structure. Now they're grouped by year. We have an object with keys of years and points. It's still not the shape we want, so let's keep going. We want to take this object and turn it into a flat list. So I'm going to say, let's save this as by year, and then let's do all the keys. This is a list of years now. Let's check if we could show that. All right, just a list of years. But for each of those years, we want to map it into something else. Right? We would like to return an object that has. So here's where high charts wants x and y coordinates on each of these things. Our x coordinate is the year, and I want it as a number, so I'm going to parse it. And our y coordinate is going to be our total number of bikes, which we haven't gotten to yet. Let's just get all of our observations, right? So by year, using the year key, this is all the data points. Right, so now our y is a list of data points. So now we want to take that list and sum up all the bikes, right? Which are strings, by the way. So we need to parse them too. So to do our summing, let's use a reduce. So reduce, if you haven't seen it before, is kind of a mind-bending function. It's an example of a higher order function, but it's a super common pattern that once you understand it and once you get used to it, it's very simple and you see it everywhere and you see lots of opportunities to use it. But our reduce function is going to get 2 arguments every time it's called. One is the current accumulator, like which in our case is going to be the running total of how many bikes we've seen, and then each of the data points. And we're going to return the next accumulator, which is just total plus point bike. And we need to turn that into a number like that. And there's a second argument that you have to pass. You can pass reduce, which is what is the initial accumulator, right? So in our case, we want it to be 0. We start counting at 0 and add up from there. All right, so what does that look like? So we have good-looking data on one year, and we got a bunch of nulls on the rest. Let's go see why. So in order to get a look at the data and see what's going on, probably we have bad data. Let's just actually get, I'm going to keep this because we'll probably want it after. But I'm going to actually just map my points to the bike values. Let's see what they look like, particularly when I get to the next year, which was one of the ones that was null. Let's see. Oh, yeah, we can already see there's actually nulls in the data. So some of these data points are bad and they have nulls in them, so we need to take those out. So before we do our reducing, let's actually filter out the bad points. We'll only keep the ones that are not null, and then we'll reduce the list. Now we have much nicer data, and this is what we really wanted to get all along to feed to high charts. So now that we have the data we want, I could do away with our whole debug output stuff where I was printing my data directly on the screen. We don't want that anymore. We're going to send our data into high charts. So I don't want a bar chart, I want a line chart. It's not about fruit anymore. We only have 1 series instead of 2. We can call ours bikes. And our data, in our case, is this list of XY points. This .bike series. Okay, let's see. There's the chart we wanted. If I reload, you'll actually see it animates. Pretty nice, seems good. this is the basic functionality we wanted, right? We got our data loading and we got a real chart drawn. That's great. There's definitely a lot of things I would customize before I would ship a chart like this. I think the defaults are way too chart junky. Like I would get rid of grid lines, I would get rid of the dots, make it prettier. But I'm not going to spend time on that because that's not really the point of this video. So the next question, so this far we've gotten to everything working, but we're loading height charts as part of our static application, right? It's currently in our vendor.js file, which is where any Ember app is going to stick extra dependencies, third-party dependencies. Let's actually go and see what our app is currently like. This dist is what got built. Whenever you build your application, this is the output. We've got a vendor.js. Actually, you know what? Let's do the production build because that'll give us realistic sizes for everything. That's a good idea. Now, while that's loading, it's building, let me just show you quick dynamic import. Let's see. Does it get referred to from here? Ah, yes. So you're all probably familiar already with static imports, right? If you're using Ember apps, you constantly use them. Ember was one of the very first major projects to adopt ES modules, and Ember people helped write the spec for ES modules. We really kind of were the guinea pigs on using them. So, but these are all static import statements, and they can only appear at the top level, and they're always hoisted by default. And so they can only really go in very few places. You can't put them inside of a conditional. You can't put them inside of a function, anything like that. And that's very intentional. It means that anybody statically analyzing this code can know exactly what set of dependencies are needed, and you're guaranteed that all the code in these modules is going to run before your own code runs, right? So they have to be statically synchronously ready. Dynamic import is a new feature, and it actually lets you call import as if it was a function, and it's asynchronous, right? So you get a promise that you can resolve for the module. Pretty simple. That's really all there is to it. It's a little weird. When you use it, all you have to know is that it looks like a function, and you could think of it as a function. It isn't really a function in JavaScript terminology, spec-wise. It's a special syntax, partly because its meaning changes based on what module you call it in, because it can do relative paths and things like that, which is not something that normal JavaScript function semantics can do. It's also like it requires special parser rules because it is a reserved keyword, right? So we're about to see that now once we try to use it. So we see that it's, so I wanted to show the current build size without the lazy loading. So here's our built app, and we see that we have a vendor.js of 900K, and once you gzip it, it gets a lot smaller, but like the fully unpacked size, 939. That's what we're going to be able to cut down once we lazy load this thing. Everything else in here is like stock stuff, like there's a JS and CSS for both your app and for your dependencies. The extra file here, auto import fastboot, this is the thing that Ember auto import is doing for me. This chunk, which currently has nothing in it, makes sure that if there are any dynamic lazily loaded dependencies, they will automatically work in fastboot too. Assuming those libraries do work in fastboot, then I don't obviously guarantee that, but I can get them loaded. So let's go ahead and let's figure out how we are going to lazy load this data, right? When you think about import, right, with a then here, it's returning a promise. It's asynchronous, right? And so in our code, we're already doing a asynchronous loading, right? We already have a route that does asynchronous loading of data. Fetch here is also promise-based API, and our model hook is really designed to help absorb asynchrony, right? It's the common place to let Ember worry about loading so that you don't have to worry about timing and stuff like that down in your components. You can load data in components, if you're curious about that, I wrote a whole post about that on the Ember forums. But when you don't need to, it's great to be able to rely on the router because it gives you a lot of things for free that you don't have to think about in terms of um, error handling, loading states, things like that. So anyway, I think the right place to load our code is going to be also in the model hook here, because this is where we're already doing our data loading. And ideally, we would want to load our code and our data in parallel so that they're not, we're not loading them in series. We're going to let them both go at the same time. There's no reason to wait around. So let's go ahead and import high charts here. Now we're going to have 2 promises instead of 1. So a good way to do that is to use the RSVP hash helper. Let's see, we could say it like that. This just takes an object and takes all of the values on the object and waits for any of those values that are promises to resolve, and then gives you the resulting resolved object. So in this case, let's call that one data points, and then let's make another one that's called high charts, and we'll say import high charts. Now, I mentioned import is actually a special keyword and it has special parsing rules, and ESLint isn't able to parse this right now, and probably Babel is not either, so you'll see my build does not work. So there's something else we need to do. And the reason is, dynamic import is a stage 3 feature. It's not officially part of JavaScript yet, but it's very close. Stage 3 is the very last stage before it's actually finalized. So I'm pretty comfortable using stage 3 features. But here's the steps you need. This is the Ember Auto Import README, and it says if you would like to use dynamic imports, here's the steps you need. You need Babel ESLint, and that was the other thing we added at the very beginning when I did one install. And we need that because we're going to tell ESLint to use that parser. So for ESLint to understand our code, it's got to parse it. And to parse it, it needs a parser that understands these new features. Since Babel is all about understanding new features, we use the Babel parser. And that means whatever Babel can parse, ESLint can now parse. And then we also need to tell Babel what to do with this thing, though. And so this is where we're going to add a Babel plugin provided by Ember Auto Import. So let's go and do that. We'll just stick it right there. And now I'm going to restart my Ember server because I just changed all those settings inside of the server, and I'm going to go back to my code, which is hopefully now parsing from ESLint. There we go. The parse error went away. And the build is working. So now we haven't finished our refactor. Let's finish it. All right, so now we're loading 2 promises. We're waiting for both of them. And in our route template, we're going to pass our data points and high charts into our component. Right? And then in our component, we're no longer going to statically load high charts. We are going to say this.high charts because it was an argument we got. All right, so that's building. My demo is still running. All right, so everything still works, even with our fancy dynamic import. So then the real question, of course, is, are we really achieving lazy loading? So let's go ahead and watch the network. Let's look at all the things that load, actually. So when we first visit this page, let's see, we get, the original page. We have some live reload support stuff. This is what helps the page auto reload for you when you're in development. Most of our stuff here, though, this is our vendor.js, which is all of our third-party JavaScript. Here's our app's own JavaScript. More live reload support. This is a browser extension. This is our Tomster image, and this is the WebSocket that's powering the live reload. So a bunch of pieces. All of that has nothing to do with the new features we just made. This is the baseline. But I wanted to show that next we're going to go to our new route. Oh, and now you know what? Let's make an actual link so this is easier to demonstrate. On our welcome page, We will link to bikes. Okay, and I'll start with an empty network again. So when I go to the bikes route, now we hit fetch two things. We fetched that our data, which we were seeing before, and also this chunk of JavaScript. This is what packaged up HighCharts and any of HighCharts' own dependencies that it needs that would have been pulled in recursively. And it works. It loaded when we got there. And if we go back and forth, my data loads again, but my code does not, because the dynamic import loader, it knows that if you loaded that JavaScript, you don't need to load it again. Obviously, we could cache our data too, but that wasn't a feature I added to this app. So we did it. It's all there, right? It all works. We can compare our final build size. For comparison, before we had, right, before we basically had, you know, our 6K of app and 900K of dependencies. All this pre-gzipped. The builds are slower when I'm screencasting. There we go. So we now have some different files. Our vendor bundle got smaller by about 200K, and our chunk is here. So we definitely moved HighCharts out. And HighCharts is also in our fastboot chunk here, which will automatically make sure it's available in fastboot. Now I don't know if HighCharts itself, it works in Node, probably not, but any library that works in Node would continue to working in fastboot automatically. So we made it work. So that's all there is to dynamic imports, and you know, there's a lot of other ways you could use dynamic imports, mostly just because there's a lot of ways to load data. And you know, another option is to build it into the component. You know, if this component is the one that needs HighCharts, the component itself can do the data loading. There's lots of good strategies for that. One is to use something like Ember concurrency to manage the asynchrony of the data being loaded and then being ready. So, you know, lots of things you can use, but you can use the knowledge you already have about how to load data to now load your code too. All you need to use is that nice dynamic import. I think that's a good place to stop.